Hi, Soundays. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 15th of September, 2024. It's good to have you here. Great to hear how things are going over here. All right. I'm running the show solo today. Danny is taking care of some other things, including this morning I was the sous chef. She was the chef. She put a peach pie in the oven, and it's still in there. So somebody's got to watch for that. So anyway, let's go ahead and switch on over to our agenda and take a look at what we're going to cover today. This is a workshop which goes along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com, as we've said many times before, but of course, everyone is welcome. Glad to have you all here. And today's topic is, actually, if I were to go back, I might change it from cheap gear to affordable gear, maybe. We're going to take about $300 worth of a microphone and a USB audio interface and see if we can make it sound good. And I think the answer is probably yes, but we'll double check that just to make sure. So we're going to do that. And then we didn't have any questions that were submitted ahead of time that I did see somebody left a comment on another YouTube video on the other channel asking if, and we might be able to cover that here, but yeah, let's go back. Come back to that. Before we jump in, let me just tell you what I'm planning to do here. So this is not the cheapest setup, but it's what I had on hand. So I have a Motu M2 USB audio interface. It's a $200 USB audio interface, very similar to the Scarlett 2i2 from Focusrite, which is super common. And then, of course, we have this right here. Oh, I've got sound coming through that computer. I've got a Shure SM58, $100 microphone. So $300, maybe that's a stretch. You'd have to have a cable as well. If you need to get a cable at a reasonable price, I would suggest going to a local pro audio shop and just having them make it there. You could make a 6-foot cable for probably $25 or less out of quality, either Canary or Mogami cable. At least at our local store, they would. Maybe it's a little bit more than that, but it's worth the extra, whatever that is. Also, you could use a Scarlett Solo, which is a $150 audio interface. So this would obviously be for something like a podcast, like a live stream, maybe a video podcast, those types of things. And you don't have to have really, really ridiculously expensive. This is all a yin and yang thing. So a few weeks ago, we talked about pro audio gear. Now we're talking about what can you achieve in 2024 with more affordable gear. So with that, let's run through a couple of things, some thoughts that I just wanted to jot down. This session is dedicated to those who are just getting started and trying to find their way. We have some really experienced community members here too that are super experienced and can give some good advice. But for those that are brand new, I just want to kind of give some perspective to help you kind of clear your mind. And not necessarily, if you're feeling sort of trapped, like, oh my gosh, I have to make the right decision, I don't want to make a wrong decision, you're doing tons and tons and tons of research to the point where you're possibly in an analysis paralysis stage, let me just run through a few things. So number one, today's gear, affordable gear, and for example, the stuff I just showed you, the Shure SM58 and a Motu M2, it's a great place to start and learn. You can get so much more, out of these than the equivalently priced gear from 10 years ago or 15 years ago. When I started in 2000 and bought my first recorder in 2006, the original Zoom H4, not the H4n, the H4. We are so many light years ahead of that today in terms of quality. So first of all, know that you can buy affordable gear. It's a great place to start and learn, and you can make some good sound. We'll demonstrate that in just a minute. When starting, I found, at least in my experience, and I find this is the case for a lot of people who are just getting started in recording sound, you don't even know what questions to ask, and that's okay. That's part of the experience, of the path, the journey, to get you there, and it takes some time. So be curious, ask questions, but you will find when you're 5 years down the road, looking back to when you started, you'll be like, well, that was a really difficult question. I asked this question of my mentor, and there's no way they could have answered that succinctly, in a reasonable amount of time. I had to know so many other things before I could really get an answer to that one big question. I was actually like, I'm going to start a podcast. How do I make it sound great? That's an enormous question. There's so many factors involved in that. There's the gear that you buy. There's the recording space. There is the microphone technique and the mixing technique. There's the post-production. There's so much involved there that it's a really difficult question to answer because there's so much. And I think a lot of times what beginners are asking is, where do I start? What do you recommend I do to start? I'm willing to learn, but I just don't know where to start. And so that's part of what we're going to cover here. And that's what I'm trying to make this, and all of you are making this a community where we can do that. This is a typo here. When we try, that is when we go and get some experience, then the questions start to become clearer to us. So you have to get some experience. You have to go and try it. You have to go and do it. And then you will mess it up, or you may not get the results that you were aiming for. And then you'll be able to ask better questions, because at that point you'll be able to say, well, I used this piece of gear. I recorded in this space. I did it this way. I put the microphone here relative to me or whomever I was miking. And these are the results I got, and I'm not sure why. And I want to make it sound more like something else. So when you're getting into it, you have to go try it. And you have to go and make those mistakes and figure it out. So I spent a lot of time in the early days, my very first kind of, aside from the Zoom H4, then I also bought around that same time a Blue Snowball. If you've ever heard of this microphone, it's a USB microphone, and they sold 1 million of them, millions of them, I'm sure. But it's not the greatest sounding microphone, but it's okay. But what that microphone was good for me because it allowed me to do a lot of exploration in terms of finding the right space to record in. Because as soon as you use your first condenser microphone, you tend to find out, oh my gosh, there's a lot of noise in this recording. Where's that coming from? And then you realize it's in your space, and you realize that sound is bouncing off of walls, reverberation is happening. And when you talk into the microphone, it's capturing that, but it's also capturing the delayed audio that's coming reflected off the walls, and it doesn't sound great. So there's just a lot of things that you have to, we make a lot of assumptions coming into learning how to record great audio, and then we learn these practical lessons along the way. So get out there and get some experience. That's the first thing. There are also some other things. If you don't know where to get experience, I hear this question a lot as well. There are a lot of things you can do. And these are some of the things that I did that may be helpful for you. We have a local music, arts, and technology camp. They call it a camp. It's a 1-week thing. It's held at a local high school. It's put together by a nonprofit organization. It's mostly kids that come to it, but there are plenty of adults too. I'd say probably 50-50, probably 50% kids, 50% adults. They bring in some great musicians that teach classes on, playing music in that particular style, which is great. But they also do the tech. So when I went to my very first one of those, I signed up for the stage tech class, and I also signed up for the mixing sound class. And the stage tech class was especially useful because we actually ran the shows. So every night with that camp, they have a show where people get up on stage and perform the things that they've learned, or the faculty at the camp perform. And so you get a chance to actually do it. You get to actually set up the soundboard, set up the microphones on stage, and learn how to do it. And that was an amazing experience for me. Really, really great way to learn. Another thing is my brother's a musician, and we started a podcast where we talked about his music and the development of his songs and things like that. And that was a really great learning experience as well in terms of how to produce and record and produce better sound. If you don't have your own podcast, or you don't want to start your own podcast, find someone else who has or wants to start a podcast and help them. You can run the sound for them and possibly do the post-production as well. Same thing for someone who has a YouTube channel. They're running a YouTube channel is a lot of work, and it's kind of hard work, honestly. There's a lot to do. And you can help someone. Sorry about that. I just needed to press a button there. You can help somebody, and you learn a lot there. Another thing I did is I ran sound at work for various things, live events, but also pre-recorded events. And that's how I kind of got into corporate video, is at work. I just kind of became the video guy because I was volunteering to do it. And I always needed help. And so I focused on the sound to a large extent, although I ended up doing a lot of camera and lighting and other stuff too. But really great learning experiences there. And then also, if none of that fits, most of you probably have relatives that you could interview or friends that you could interview, and just record those. Put together a project of some sort. Just somebody, you have a friend that does something that's kind of unique. Go interview them about that unique thing, and just make a recording and give it to them. Or figure something out. There are a lot of things you can do to learn how to make better sound. So, all right. I think that's everything I wanted to cover there. So let's come back here. As I mentioned before, we have the Motu M2 USB audio interface. So let's just dive in and see what I can do with something like this. Just a simple USB audio interface. It has 2 inputs. It's nothing special with respect to Motu, the company, which incidentally stands for Mark of the Unicorn, I learned. So I'm just going to connect my Shure SM58 right here into the Motu M2, and we've just got the XLR cable plugged in there. Now, this particular audio interface does not supply a ton of gain. I did some tests earlier on, and I basically have to max out the gain, which is okay. You can do that. Some people are really scared to do that. It's okay. You can do that. It's not going to ruin anything. It has pretty good preamplifiers and pretty good converters in the M2, so not something to worry about. All right. So in terms of recording, I'm going to assume the $300 obviously doesn't include the computer. So I'm assuming that you have a computer you can work with, and you can get a free app to record. And what I would recommend, if you really want to dive into making great sound, I would probably go with the free version of DaVinci Resolve, because that is an amazing piece of software for what you're getting free. And you can also do video editing in there as well. You don't have to, but you can if you choose to. So it is a very capable app. And let's go ahead and switch on over to that. Here we go. Okay. Now I have muted the sound on that computer because some funny things were happening when I try to record on the Motu M2 and play it back over the live stream at the same time. There's some funniness going on there. So let me just confirm here. If I play this back right now, you should not hear it. Yeah, not coming through. Okay. Let's go ahead and set this up to make a recording. So I'm going to come in here. Actually, let's go and... All right, so this is DaVinci Resolve, and specifically we're down here on the Fairlight tab at the bottom, you can see. And of course you have other things. You can import video and audio clips over here. There's a cut page for doing quick cuts. There's a regular edit page where you edit your video. There's Fusion where you do compositing and add visual effects, and there's a color grading panel. I mean, it's an amazing app and especially since it's free, but is it perfect? No. Is it pretty good for free? Yeah, it's pretty good for free. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do some recording here, and you will just hear me on my regular microphone first, and then we'll bring it over into the Mac where you can hear it there. So I've got my, just to show you, I've got my microphone here. I did put I think it was a $2 piece of foam over this, and I did that to illustrate something. I would estimate that when you're making audio recordings, and right now, incidentally, you're not hearing this mic, you're hearing the Earthworks mic here. I would estimate, and this is debatable, I would say 50% of the quality of the sound you get in the end is gear. The other 50% is expertise. It's skills, knowledge, experience, and applying those. The percentage is debatable, but I just want to say that it is a substantial portion, has to do with skill. It's not just the gear. So this is an example of that because you're like, well, and you're like, why are you talking about that? Um, First of all, my voice has a lot of sibilance in it, and this mic can pick up and emphasize a bit of that sibilance. Putting the foam on the front actually helps manage that a little bit with my particular voice. It also manages plosives so that when you say the letter P or B, and if you're up close on a microphone and you say P or B, there's a little puff of air that comes out of your mouth, goes straight through the grill, and it still may have enough velocity when it gets through the foam underneath the grill to hit the microphone capsule. And you get this sort of bassy boom sound. And I have heard quite a lot of recordings from creators on YouTube, even popular ones, where it's just like after a while, I'm like, oh my goodness, my head hurts because they keep basically distorting their audio because they're not managing those plosives. Now, there are a few ways you can do that. Foam cover can help, but there's also a cost to a foam cover. Again, another thing you learn from experience. On some microphones that aren't as sensitive at the higher frequencies as the SM58 tends to be in the sibilance range, sometimes putting a foam cover on can make the overall sound kind of muddy and dull, lacking some high frequency response. So you have to be careful and you have to kind of tune it for different voices. It depends on the voice. Now, if it is making your sound muddy, you can leave it off, forget about it, don't even buy one, and then use microphone technique. So here, for example, you'll notice the microphone's not right in front of my mouth. It's off to the side, aimed at my mouth. And the advantage of that is that as I talk, and if I say the letter P or B or any words that start with those or have those in them, that burst of air is going to go past the microphone capsule instead of straight into the microphone capsule. So that's another thing about microphone technique. And so if you're working with someone else, you may have to teach them these things. So if you're helping run sound for somebody and you're finding that they're doing things like that, well, you may you may need to help them out with that. Positioning the microphone. This is a dynamic microphone. It needs to be pretty close. If you try to boom this out of the scene and you only have as much gain as a Motu M2 can supply you, which is probably, I don't know, maybe it's 50 some dB of gain, which is not a ton. You're going to have to boost the audio quite a bit in post, which means your noise floor comes up too. So with a dynamic microphone, you have to get used to the idea that it's going to be in the frame. That's okay. There are ways you can manage that so that it's not super prominent. You can put it down a little bit lower, maybe something like this, but it probably needs to be within 4 or 5 inches of the person who's speaking. So that's what I do on my live stream all the time. We have the earthworks right here. It's not superimposing. It's not covering my face. It's there, yes. You can see it when I'm wearing a lighter shirt. When I'm wearing a darker shirt, most people don't even notice it. So these are some of the things that you kind of learn over time. So let's go ahead and switch back on over to the Mac. Okay. First thing, now in DaVinci Resolve, this is set up a little bit like a kind of a traditional console. Now you have to remember Fairlight it started as a console. It was a big console that you would buy. They were tens of thousands of dollars, and you would move it with a forklift into to your house, and then you'd have to get most people didn't have it in houses. It was in studios for the most part, but that's its background. So the way that you set up how to record to a particular channel is a little bit funky, but let me just run through it really quickly. So if I were starting from scratch, first I would come to the edit page and I would right click in this section up here. If you don't have it, just click on Media Pool, right click, choose Timelines, and create a new timeline. And what I would do here is if I'm just recording spoken word audio, maybe for a podcast, I would change this to mono and choose the number of tracks that you need. So if you're recording 2 people, you need 2 tracks. If you're recording 1 person, you just need 1 track. If you're recording 18 people, then you need 18 tracks. And you have a much more complicated job on your hands. So I would probably start with 1 or 2. So I would switch it to mono because voice is just a mono thing. Don't worry, it'll come out as stereo or dual mono when you finish it off, so people will be able to hear it in both the left and the right ear. But you're just recording mono. And then you click Create. Now we've already done this, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel, but that's how you would set that up. Now, the next thing you have to do is once you've done that, you'll come in here to the Fairlight tab, and you will have the number of audio tracks that you just specified. So I just have one because it's just me. And what I have to do is I have to tell Fairlight, okay, where do I get, if I want to record into here onto this track, where do I get the audio from? And that's called patching in this case. So what I want to do is I'm going to come up here to the Fairlight menu, come to patch input output, and you get this screen right here. On the left-hand side, you have your audio sources, the potential places where audio can come from. And we have selected right now audio inputs. That's exactly what we want. Is it? Interestingly, I don't know why my iPhone microphone is showing there. Let's just check my system preferences and make sure our input is set to the M2 right now. That's good. Okay. Now what I want to choose over here, we'll come back to that. We may have to do a bit of troubleshooting, so we'll come back to that. Now over here, where I want the audio to go, in this particular case, I want it to go to the Fairlight page. I want it to go to these audio tracks here. So I'm going to choose track input. Okay, so that's what we've got there. And right now it looks like these are already patched. I don't know why it's doing that. We're going to need to figure this out. Get our monitors, we have buses. You know what? I bet it was because when I started this, maybe the Motu was not connected. So what I'm going to do, give me just a moment here. Okay, yeah, we've got that. I'm going to quit DaVinci Resolve. We're going to restart it and have it kind of reset itself to the current state of the system. So troubleshooting, this is what you're going to have to do in real life when you're doing audio recording. All right, we'll go ahead and bring this one in. Okay, let's see if it fixed itself or if we're going to have to start over. It fixed itself. It sees that there is the audio, or sorry, the Motu M2. So it realizes that there's an audio interface here with two inputs. And again, we want to patch our audio input. Number one, I've connected my Shure SM58 to the first input on the Motu M2. It's this one here. And you'll see when I click on it, it makes a white box around it. So that means it's selected. Okay. And then again, I want to come over here and choose, I want to route this to, I want to patch it to one of my tracks in the timeline. And you'll notice I only have one track set up. So we can patch it by clicking here and then click the patch button. And that's all we have to do. Now we can go ahead and close this. Now what that means is when I come over here, Audio 1, when I set it up to arm it for recording, I have to press this R button to say, okay, we're going to record here. Notice now you're seeing some level on the meters. That's me talking into the Shure SM58. Let me just make sure you're still hearing me on the other microphone, so that's good. Let me just check here. This is, again, behind the scenes. Today's all about behind the scenes. I have the Mac muted, so you're not hearing the Mac yet. We'll have to unmute that when we go to do the post-processing. All right, so now I should be ready to record. So I've armed this track to record. All I'm saying is that when I press the big record button up here, if I had multiple tracks, I'd have to arm just the ones that I want to record. That's what arming is for. And that's what this R button does, arm for record. Now, what I can do is I can come up here and I can start recording. So let me go ahead and do a little voiceover. I'm going to be just a few inches from the microphone here like this. And let's do it. So back to the Mac. All right, we are now recording our very first podcast here into the Shure SM58 through the Motu M2 into DaVinci Resolve on the Fairlight tab. So this is what we're hearing here, and we're going to do just a little bit of talking here so that we have something to work with. And what I wanted to talk about today, of course, and what we've already talked about is if you want to get good at recording audio, you've got to practice. You've got to get out there and do it, get some experience, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, think it through, talk to people that can mentor you, join our little community here, stay involved in it, and that's what you can do. So let's go ahead and call it there, and we'll go ahead and do some post-processing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop, and there's our recording right there. Okay. Now, I am going to disarm this channel. There we go. Move that mic out of the way. So there we have our first recording. Let's unmute the computer and play that back and see how it sounds. I'm going to use this to select this section, so it'll just loop through this section. We have the loop playback turned on, so here we go.
All right, we are now recording our very first pod.
Okay, that's a mess. So we have a sample rate issue of some sort there. Did you hear what that sounds like? Let me play that back again. I'm pretty sure that's a sample rate mismatch.
Cast here into the Shure SM58 through the Motu M2 into DaVinci Resolve.
Sounds awful, doesn't it? Well, here's another troubleshooting thing. Let's go ahead and go back over to this clip and see if it's doing it too, because then that'll tell me something. If I play this back and it also has that robotic sound to it, that means that something is muddled up between DaVinci Resolve and the audio signal it's sending over to the Blackmagic design, to the Blackmagic switcher, which is where the audio for my computer is going. So let's play this back too. This is troubleshooting. And here we go. Number one, another thing, start a podcast. I also started Nope, so it's not that. It definitely has something to do with the way the Motu connected with DaVinci Resolve. Now, I will say something. Let me just take a pause here. I have a pretty complex setup here. Normally, when you're recording a podcast, what I would recommend is don't have your computer doing anything else. Just focus, close all the apps and get it all sorted out. So when you do that, you're going to be able to play it back and you're not going to have this problem. Also, test. If you're getting ready to record the podcast of your life, do a recording first and make sure everything's working. Don't turn anything off once you have it all working. So the question I have here is, nice fail, Curtis. Did you plan that? Actually, I did do my testing last night, and actually we had this problem as well. And it has to do with the routing between all the different things. And DaVinci Resolve is getting mixed up because when I'm switching between output sources and they're not negotiating the sample rates correctly. So yes, I did, believe it or not, actually, go ahead and laugh. I did actually plan it. Thank you, Eric. So I knew this was a possibility today, and that's why I had some that were already recorded. So we can work with the pre-recorded bits. And honestly, it's pretty much the same thing. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you simplify your signal chain as much as possible. So don't have any other apps running. Don't have a bunch of devices connected to it that you don't need. Just the devices that you do need connected to it. Test beforehand. Don't turn everything, and after you do that test, leave everything on and ready and set to go so that you're not dealing with any, you're introducing additional factors that could ruin things or mess things up or make it difficult to get things done. So in any case, that is the way to approach this. And I completely agree, Linda. Test. Make sure you're ready to go. It is so embarrassing. It's embarrassing for everyone when you're in a live sound situation and the sound's not working and everyone turns and looks back at the mixer to see what's going on. So in any case, that's just something to keep in mind. There's a little bit of a let's just address this. So Matt says audio. So many kids today don't have computers. This example requires a computer. You should be using Ferrite on the iPhone, iPad. That's a fair point. There, once they get up at most of the kids at schools nowadays do have laptops. At least here I've noticed. So it can go in. It's a valid point. Not everyone has a full-blown computer. I get it, and agree. So I don't use Ferrite, so I'm not in a position to demonstrate that. But yes, you can record to your phone as well. Just keep in mind that there are some things that I think are really important. When you are recording, I think it's important to have, I would avoid running on battery if you can. Let me say that. And phones, especially if you're trying to power an audio interface with a phone, be really careful about that because those, just have a plan. and make sure that you can record long enough. So if you're going to go record an hour-long podcast on your phone, make sure your phone is charged. Test that it can actually run and record that long on the battery. And I would also have some sort of power backup options. So for example, on the iPhones, I know there are those dongles you can buy where you can actually plug in USB and either Lightning or USB-C to power it and send audio to an audio interface at the same time. So just have a plan in place. That's all really important. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go back over and let's play what we have so far. So this is a recording. I'm going to go ahead and default over to a recording I made last night. Let's go ahead and select this. And this is what we're listening to. This is the raw recording. Now, there are some other things to take into account or to consider when you're putting together your first podcast. And as I mentioned before, getting the experience doing it will get you to a point where you can start to ask more questions. You'll run into a problem. So you'll operate within the kind of the domain of your experience and what you're capable of doing. And then you'll come up with much better questions because you're like, well, how do I solve this problem? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? So the real secret is to get doing stuff. Okay, so that's where we're starting. Let's go ahead and hear it in the chat. How do you think that sounds? Could someone publish that to YouTube or a podcast and feel proud about it? Let us know in the chat. What do you think? All right. Audio Buff says, I hate it when I make a mistake and people look at me. Worse yet when others make a mistake and they still look at me. You're on the hook. When you're the A1 mixer, Mr. Audio Buff, you are on the hook. All right. DaVinci Girl has a solution for me here as far as loopback and being able to work around those sample rate issues. Thank you for that, DaVinci Girl. I appreciate that. How did you fix the sample rate problem? I did that by testing ahead of time. So this is a recording that was made ahead of time, Robert. All right. I bet all of us remember the first big fail. I'm 71 and still have nightmares thinking about it. Yes, we all will have those moments, but if you approach it with the right mindset, you prepare, make yourself a checklist so that you don't, especially if you're going on location, that you have everything, and go through that checklist once you got everything set up. Test, and then don't turn anything off while you're waiting for the person to arrive to start recording or however it's working. So there you go. There are some other things to consider. All right, so that's where we're starting. So let me know in the chat here again if you feel like that is that good enough. I think that a first timer that made a recording that sounded like that, I would say they should feel proud about that. That's a pretty good sounding thing. So another option out there, Linda brings up, most of the kids I work with use Audacity. Works on every computer as far as I know. Yeah, I believe there are versions for Mac, Windows. There used to be for Linux as well. I assume there still is. Okay. RodTech says it sounds low, the lower frequency. Excuse me. I'm not sure what you mean, Rod. Do you mean it's there's too much low frequency energy in it, or do you mean it's not loud enough? I'm just curious which of those you mean. Okay, we have some support for Audacity here. It is free. I believe it moved from an open source license to something else where it's actually now owned by a company, but it's still free. So I don't know all the details of how that works. And Robert notes here that it was written on Linux and then ported to other operating systems. Okay, so with that, I know there's some latency here, but to me, that is something that I think a first-time recordist could feel pretty proud about. Were there issues? Yeah. First of all, my microphone technique, you could tell I clearly turned off axis from the microphone at one point. The level immediately drops and then comes back up. It's a dynamic microphone. Your proximity to the microphone definitely makes a difference. To me, it does sound a little boomy. There's quite a bit of proximity effect there. I was working into it pretty close, so it is a little bit boomy. So I would probably do something about that. And especially, well, one more note on this next thing. There's some other things I would take care of too. It was a little on the quiet side, so I would make it louder for most podcasts or any sort of online content. Right now, you can see here, if we look back over here at the meter, it's pretty small, but this is a loudness meter over here. And right now it's saying we're minus 2.5 LUFS from our target. Excuse me. And if you don't know what your target is in DaVinci Resolve, the way you could go and check that is you come over here into the File menu, Project Settings, you come to Fairlight, and you set your target loudness right here. So we have it set to minus 23 LUFS. Now, for videos online, that's okay. It's still a little on the quiet side. I mean, if you really, we're not going to be able to get into all the details of, loudness normalizing and mastering audio in this. That's a pretty advanced topic. And I'm not necessarily a master at that, at mastering. So, so those are some things that kind of come to mind. So what that means is I'd probably need to do some, in fact, if we take this and let's just go ahead and open this up so we can get a closer look at the waveform. You can see we don't have a ton of headroom here. If I right click on this and I choose Analyze Audio Levels, and click Analyze, we're at minus 25.6. So on YouTube, I think a lot of people misunderstand this, but the YouTube target is minus 14 LUFS. So numbers closer to 0 are louder. We're at minus 25.6. I would say this, I don't think that just because YouTube set the target at minus 14 LUFS that we should master all of our content that's going on that platform to minus 14. Actually, in my opinion, if it's spoken word audio, some of it sounds a little too compressed if you get it up to minus 14, if you make it that loud. To me, I prefer to be around the minus 17 level. That makes it loud enough so it's still not like people have to jump for their volume control as soon as they get to your video, but they also get more dynamics. There's a little bit more life left in the audio. And it's loud enough still for lower capability playback systems, so earbuds and things like that. People can still hear. They'll get plenty of volume out of it and be able to hear and understand what you're saying. So that's one thing. But we only have 1.8 dB of headroom, so we can't just boost the levels here a whole ton. But we could get up to minus 23, and so we'd probably have to do some compression. And we have a compressor in here. We'll talk about that in just a moment here. So we did get a clarification. So DaVinci says the mic is a dynamic. Yes, it is a dynamic microphone. RodTech clarifies it's not loud enough, but it is clear and muffled like you were too close to the mic. And that's exactly right. So I would take care of that as well. I think, Audio Buff. I think the next YouTube video I do, I'll show my biggest mistake I ever made, and it was all recorded. It was during a church service, and the Holy Spirit left and went to another church. Epic. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But audio, that's pretty funny. Matt says if you expand the budget a little, get a Rode Duo or the Mackie DLZ-XS, you can bypass the computer and get the EQ and stuff done in recording. That's absolutely right. You can. And that can make things quite a bit easier. Nevertheless, again, I do think it's still valuable for people to learn doing it this way so that they actually understand what they're doing. Get some practice with it so that when you do get, for example, some sort of podcast recorder or mixer that does have a compressor built into it, you'll understand how it works. So, all right. So those are some of the things I would do. I will also say one other thing. I'm gonna switch back here. Mouth noise. There's some mouth noise there. It's driving me batty. Especially when you close mic, there's going to be some of that. Sorry to do that to you, but you need to know what it sounds like. If you don't, I don't know how to do that for a low price because I use iZotope RX mouth declick. But that's another thing, and that's more advanced. Again, just to get started, let's go ahead and show what we would do, as a start here. So to make it louder, the first thing I would do is I would apply a compressor. And here under the dynamics section here, we have a compressor, and I can just pop that open. In fact, it's a number of things. That's why they call it dynamics. It includes an expander gate. We're not going to mess with that here today, but we do have a compressor and we have a limiter. Now, first thing for newbies to know, digital audio, the highest amplitude, the highest the waveform can get is 0 dB. I'm oversimplifying, so let's not have an argument about that. But your audio, once it's published, needs to be you can't go above 0 dB. Just you can't. So you need to keep under 0 dB. However, if you want to make your audio sound louder, that may mean that you need to take some of those transients or the tallest amplitude parts of the waveform and compress them down a little bit. And then once you've done that, you can boost all of the audio up so that it's closer to 0 dB and it sounds louder to the people listening to it. So that's what we can do with a compressor and limiter, and that's what we have going on in here. So let me play this back now with a compressor and limiter. Now, let me just kind of explain how I approach this. So the limiter to me is mostly just to keep you from hitting up against 0 dB, because when the waveform hits up against 0 dB, if it hits up against it consistently for a period of time, the audio will then just play back and it will sound distorted, awful, unlistenable, and painful for people to listen to. So you don't want to do that. So what a limiter does is it just prevents that waveform from hitting that 0 dB mark. And so all I really want this to do is just catch those things that kind of slip through. If there's a point, and you can see in the waveform here, there's definitely a transient right here. That's sitting up pretty close to 0 dB. So the top and the bottom are both 0 dB. And the waveform, if it gets up to here, to the 0 and stays up there consistently, it will sound distorted. So this one's already pretty close. So if I wanted to boost the levels, I have to actually pull this one particular transient down, this one little part right here down, and then I can boost the overall waveform up so it sounds louder. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's kind of one way to think about it. So there we go. Let's go ahead and play it back with a compressor. And this is not a compressing masterclass. I'm just going to demonstrate, and we're not going to go into the details of what all these settings do. We'll cover that another time. Now, there are some other things to take into account or to consider when you're putting together your first podcast. And as I mentioned before, getting the experience doing it will get you to a point where you can start to ask more questions. You'll run into a problem. So you'll operate within the kind of the domain of your experience and what you're capable of doing. And then you'll come up with much better questions because you're like, well, how do I solve this problem? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? So the real secret is to get doing stuff. And there are, you might ask questions, well, what can I do? Okay. So you'll notice here, I reset my little loudness meter here, and we're actually coming in just almost a dB above our target now. So we're getting close to minus 22 dB. However, and I use the limiter, so you can use this makeup gain here to push the overall levels up while at the same time I was doing this compression. But there was a problem. It's starting to sound really muddy. And that's sometimes what compression can do to voices, especially if they already had kind of a lot of bass energy in them. So how would I fix that? Well, this is what I would do. You have this order control right here. And what I would do is I would tell it, you know what? I want to reduce some of that bass before it gets to the compressor. So I want it to go through an equalizer first where I can pull some of that bass down, remove some of that muddiness, and then go to the dynamics processor and then go to any other effects that we have plugged in here. Or if we wanted to, we could do the effects first, and I'm going to maybe demonstrate a couple of those as well. Then the EQ, then the dynamics. So actually, normally I would work this way. So what that means is that this equalizer will actually get the audio will go through the equalizer first and then to the dynamics. Actually, technically, it'll go through whatever effects I have in here. I don't have any in here right now, but if I put some in there, it'll go through those first. Then it will go to the equalizer. Then it will go through the dynamics. and then it'll be played back. So that's what this does here. So let's just going to open this equalizer and take a look at this here. All right, so the first thing, let's just reset this all together. Let's go back to our default. No, default. You can tell I haven't worked a lot in this lately. Here we go, reset. Okay, so while we're playing this back, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and pull out some of that bass. There's just too much of it going on. So let's take care of that and see where that gets us. So here we go, playing back. Nobody's gonna hire me for a job just yet. Well, there are other things you can do. Here are some of the things I did. Volunteer to run sound for a community event. There were a series of, there was a music, arts, and technology camp that was run here locally, and they had a stage tech class, and I took the stage tech class. I also took another class that was specifically on mixing sound, and we actually got to run those events. Every night they had an event, and the different classes performed on stage, and they had to have somebody run sound. And so we in the class got to run the sound, and then on subsequent camps in following years, I got to also help teach that class, and I also taught a recording class. So that's one way to do it. Number one, another thing, start a podcast. Okay, so that's the first thing I would do here. And so again, what it's doing is it's reducing some of that bass before it gets to the compressor, where the bass is, and for reasons that we're not going to go into detail here, but when you compress dialogue with a single band compressor, like a broadband compressor, so a lot of times it'll start to sound more bassy. And sometimes you want a little bit of that, but this is a way to address that, is to run it through an equalizer first. And here we're using a high pass / low cut filter. Same thing, two different names, which is this one here. So I'm rolling off some of those lower frequencies, and we've set it all the way up to 138. That's actually quite a bit. You're going to have to do this to taste. And here's another thing that gets tricky. When you first get into post-production, you will at some point go, oh, that sounds amazing. And then you'll go away doing something else, and some other time you'll come back and you'll listen to it and you're like, what was I thinking? That was a mess. So how do you get around that? Well, you listen to a reference track. So if there's somebody's recording that you have heard that's similar, in terms of, like in this case, spoken word, or a podcast that you're aiming for, that you like the sound of it and you want your podcast to sound like it, go play a little bit of it and then come back and listen to yours and use that as a reference point. That can be really, really helpful. Now, granted, of course, whoever's voice you're working with is a different voice probably than whoever's on that other podcast, but it at least get you in the right universe. So you'll sound a little bit closer there. So that's one thing that we can do here too. All right. Let's do some more EQ. Let's see if I can sweeten this a little bit more. Here we go. So started a podcast. My brother is a musician, and we created a podcast where I would talk with him about his music, especially as he was writing new music and recording new albums and things like that. So that was a lot of fun, a lot of experience, and great things learned there. If you don't have your own podcast, or you don't have someone else you want to make a podcast with, then maybe find someone else who does have a podcast who just needs some help, someone who needs maybe some post-processing, or they need someone to set up their recording gear, or whatever it may be. You can also help out there. Same thing with someone with a YouTube channel, or perhaps at work there are going to be some recording projects, or maybe there's a live presentation where they need someone to run sound for that. That's another opportunity. Or if none of that, maybe you just want to record interviews that you do with some of your relatives. So maybe you have some folks that are getting up in age and you want to have them tell kind of their life story. You could do something like that as well. So lots of opportunities to get experience. Now, there are some other things to take into account or to consider when you're putting together your first podcast. And as I mentioned before, getting the experience doing it will get you to a point where you can start to ask more questions. You'll run into a problem. So you'll operate within the kind of the domain of your experience and what you're capable of doing. I'm going to pause there. And the reason I am is that that actually probably sounds pretty close to my real life voice, I would say. So that's, you have to decide what you want your, oh, I didn't show any of that here. Let me switch over. So this is what I ended up doing. I cut a little bit in the mid range here, and I did roll off some of the high frequencies as well. They're just not needed here. And it just kind of helps reduce some of the noise. So a low cut and a low pass filter or a high cut filter. I always have to think those through. Just can clean up some noise, some things that you don't need there for the dialogue recording. So that's what I did there. Apologies, I'm running the show a solo today, so sometimes I forget to show these things. So I'm sure we'll get someone in the chat say, Curtis, you're not showing it. Apologies, I just realized it. So you have to decide how you want it to sound. And you may want it to sound broadcasty. You may want it to have a little bit more bass in the lower frequencies. That's okay. Go into your EQ and don't roll off so much of the bass. Here I rolled off quite a bit. I went all the way up to 142 hertz on that roll off. It's not a super extreme roll off curve. It's a 12 dB per octave, I think, is what that is. But in any case, you have to kind of decide how you want it. Be careful about leaving things super, super bassy. It becomes really kind of woofy and fatiguing to listen to over time. So remember, as someone who's running the sound, your job is to make it an enjoyable experience, to stay out of the way, to make the audio a non-issue, and to make it enjoyable to listen to. And sometimes people, when they're first starting, think, oh, that really cool broadcasty, bassy sound is so amazing. It's really fatiguing to listen to if you go too far. If you're going to have someone listening to an hour-long piece of content, or even a 15-minute or 5-minute piece of content, it's just, sometimes it's too much. So you have to be careful and find the right spot. And that's why I think it's important to listen to reference tracks, things that you've listened to that you really enjoy, and try to kind of achieve a similar type of sound. So with that, let's take a pause here. Leo had a question. Leo, this is your question. When using 32-bit float, do you turn limiters off? I assume you're asking while recording. Most recorders don't have the ability to have a limiter on when you're doing 32-bit float. I would leave it off unless you have a recorder where you're in a situation where you're recording and producing live sound. And when you're doing that, you're going to want limiters on. You're going to want to output limiters to the sound you're feeding from your mixer to the program, however you're doing that. So you will want output limiters on in those circumstances. So that's the first thing. So I don't know if you're doing live or if you're doing just recordings. If you're doing just recording and it's not a live thing, I would just turn the limiters off. And then number two, normalize your sound as a regular step in post. Absolutely, yes. You still that's a part of the thing with 32-bit float is you're pushing the work to post. You're not doing it while you're recording. You're intentionally, in many cases, pushing it to post. At least that's how a lot of people are using 32-bit float recorders. So yes, you definitely need to normalize things in post, and you're probably going to have to. That's the thing, is that when the audio does in a 32-bit float recording, when it goes above 0 dB, you can't leave it there. You need to get it down under 0 dB for your final piece. So you're going to have to do something to achieve that. And you're either going to have to compress it, or you're going to have to use clip gain and pull just that transient down. You're going to have to do something to manage that. So there's always going to be a post-production step to do it right. So, however, you can also record 32-bit float and send a live feed of the audio to the program, either to the camera or to the switcher or whatever type of program you're doing. In those cases, number one, setting your level, they call it different things. Sound Devices calls it gain, even though it's technically digital gain on a Sound Devices mix pre, or on an 8 series recorder. And then Zoom, it's a fader. So you're just adjusting the fader. So you still want to adjust the fader. So ideally, none of your peaks are getting up right next to 0 dB when you're doing it live and to recording. So you still need to watch your levels. It's not like you can just set it and walk away. So those are the things to keep in mind. So it's a great question, Leo, and thank you for bringing that up. All right. Linda had Had some questions here. So would the effects that you apply, so when, just going back and referencing this, so Linda's asking a great question here. It's about order of operations. And so we have this order thing, and I set it up so that any third party or other plugin effects that I applied would get processed first, then the equalizer, then the dynamics. And question is, okay, what would be those first effects that you would apply? Actually, as I mentioned earlier, I would actually apply a mouth declick. So I would come in here to RX. Let's go ahead and put it on there. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Here it is, mouth declick. So I'm going to drag that over, drop it into this track right there. Take it just a moment. Here it is. Okay. You want to hear how many mouth clicks there are in this audio? Let's try this. I'm going to set it to output clicks only. Prepare yourself, people. Here we go. Okay, that's about all we can manage here. I apologize to do that to you, but you need to experience that at some point. Especially when you're close miking, you're going to get more of that mouth noise. Although I found even with boom mics, you can pick that up. So I would probably apply that. So if there was some heavy noise reduction, yeah, or if there's some heavy noise, then yeah, I'd probably take care of some of that noise first as well. To answer your question, Linda, it's a great question. All right. Oh, DaVinci Girl has an interesting idea here. Mix a very small portion of a convolution reverb to it. There exists some Sennheiser impulse response. This gives you, with a cheaper dynamic microphone, a little portion of a condenser microphone's sweetness. Cool trick. Thanks for sharing that, DaVinci Girl. Your room noise before was around -60. Goes to show the value of good room treatment. Yeah, it does. And actually, it's not just room treatment. That's part of it. Room treatment is definitely part of it, but also controlling noise. So turning off fans, turning off air conditioning or heating, anything that fans and computers, anything that you can control makes a big difference there. All right, Leo, thank you for the question. Appreciate it so much. All right, then we have here from RM. So glad I caught it live. I have a question for you. Have you ever used any of this plug, Supertone Clear, as a denoise and de-reverb audio plugin? I have not used it. I've heard of it, but I have not used it. If they have a trial version, it may be worth a look. But I think the one that I've used that I'm most impressed with so far, maybe Supertone Clear is up there, but DX Revive Pro is probably the most amazing denoise and de-reverb plugin I've used. And it's actually, they call it, what do they call it? They call it vocal restoration. I think they call it vocal restoration because it's more than just denoising and de-reverbing. It's actually resynthesizing the voice as well, which is a different thing. Those mouth clicks, I always ask talent to drink water constantly. Yes. So in any case, oh no, Fachiri. Well, glad you joined us, Fachiri. Sorry you couldn't join us earlier, but in any case, here's a question. I have a Scarlett 2i2. Putting cheap setups aside, I love the sound of the Shure SM7B, so I'm leaning towards that. But would it be better if I got an SM7DB with the built-in preamp? I haven't used that yet, and if I don't know which generation of the Scarlett 2i2 you have. I would do some more research. I think some people were. Yeah, I don't have a clear answer for you just because I haven't used the Shure SM7DB. But I don't know which version or which generation Scarlett 2i2 you have. Some of the older ones didn't supply quite as much gain. I think the newer one, Generation 4, supplies more gain. So it's probably not as necessary on the newer one. But gosh, I wish I had a clear answer for you. The SM7DB, I mean, Yeah, maybe some other people have answers on that. But anyway, there's some thoughts there. Probably if you have that option, if you have the budget for the DB version, get it, because you can just turn the DB thing. You can turn the booster off if you need to, and it's a non-issue. But if you need it, it's there. So that, I guess that's my short version there. All right. All right. Renee says Voice EX. That's another voice restoration type plugin. Fachiri says, one of my transmitters has been damaged by a production and they won't cover it. Should I pursue payment for it? It's been out of commission for 4 weeks now. That's a really tough question, Fachiri. It depends. Like, are these people that you work with all the time? And is there some argument over how it got damaged? And did you have an agreement in place or contract in place that was going to be covered? I mean, I guess it depends on a lot of things. So the reason I say that is that if you pursue it, there's a risk that you will end the relationship. If that's not a major concern for you, then yeah, certainly pursue it. If you have a contract that's very clear about it, that will help make this a less of an issue. So if your contract has something that says very clearly who's responsible for what damage, that's super helpful as well. So if you don't have one of those, you might want to look into getting something like that for future jobs, just so that it's really clear on who covers what. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts there. So, okay. Yeah, the new 2i2 has 69 dB of gain, so you would not need the Shure SM7 dB. You could just use the original Shure SM7B. Yeah, I knew it had more gain. I didn't realize it was 69 dB. That's quite a lot. So, and Rag and Bone says it's hardly ever worth damaging goodwill. Yeah, I think that's definitely a consideration here. It's hardly ever worth it. So, all right, friends, thank you for coming by today. Thank you for being a part of this community where we can all learn to make better sound together. Get out there this week, make some great sound, and we will talk to you next week. And I'm doing this solo. Bye.